Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, bringing together scholars and thought leaders and analysts of all different types to break down the news stories for us so that when somebody confronts you with some nonsensical stuff, whether it be on Facebook or at a holiday party, Christmas party, you have some facts to back them up. First up with us this week, and by the way, you can find out more about us at tertiumquids.org and go back to our podcast channel on YouTube. Look up Freedom and Prosperity Radio on YouTube. Back with us, Luke Rosiak, investigative reporter with the Daily Caller, and busing is back in the news. And if you've got as many miles on your odometer as I do, you remember when busing was what all the cool cities were doing. Luke, good morning and welcome back to the program. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Now, this story comes out of Maryland, correct? Maryland schools beginning to do busing again like they used to in the 70s and 80s?
It's happening all over the country, but particularly we saw it in bubble up in Fairfax County, Virginia, and now especially in Howard County, Maryland, and Montgomery County, Maryland. In Howard County, they just voted to move 6,000 kids out of their schools, in some cases passing as many eight other schools before they get to their final destination, and this is based not on race, but on socioeconomic status. So what they do is they look if you're receiving free lunch or not, and that's an indicator of if you're poor, but they basically say they're also using it as a proxy for race.
And they're doing it both directions, so they're taking kids that don't need, a lunch program and are coming from more affluent areas and busing them into poorer areas too, correct?
Correct, and, it's all coming from this sort of identity politics philosophy, obviously, but there's no data supporting that it works. That, we all kind of know that rich kids do better in schools, and so if you've got a school with a whole bunch of rich people in it, they're going to have higher average scores. But the thing is, the data very much does not show that if you take a poor kid and have him sit kind of in the general vicinity of rich kids, then he'll suddenly do better.
Right.
And so you have these people that are these distinguished academics, education, doctorates, they're in charge of schools. You would think they would care about data. You'd think they would care about results. And they have kind of very much ignored that and pushed things that are, not only unproven, but disproven, as you mentioned, not only in the 70s, but even using the current data of these schools, because they have schools with these different mixes, right? A lot of poor kids, a lot of rich kids, or somewhere in between. And what you can see is that the kids who come from one parent households who are poor, they have lower test scores regardless. It's not really about the proximity of who they're around, but there's not really any discussion of, addressing those underlying causes.
Well, Luke, it sounds to me almost like they're trying to engage in race shaming, because it's like, well, we're going to bring these poor inner city kids to your classrooms, and then if your kids still do better than them, you should feel guilty over that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the busing is to help the administrators, not to help the children. Right now, when they do these report cards for schools at the end of the year, they have a lot of schools that are reported to be failing because so many kids do so poorly. And if they can dilute them with higher performing kids, then basically every school is equally mediocre, but there are fewer schools that are below that failing threshold that kind of shames administrators. And so the administrators are able to get bonuses and to say that they're doing something that's working, but the kind of the sleight of hand there is the individual kids who were doing poorly before are still doing poorly. It's just the average for the whole school has gone up because you've brought in kids that are already scoring more highly. So, basically there's a lot of, it's not just busing, it's other really kooky anti-meritocracy, identity politics fueled strategies that have completely taken over the K-12 school system. And the common theme is that it's rigging statistics to give the illusion of success, because whatever these people have been trying for the last couple decades hasn't been working, because we still have this, gaps in income-based performance and so on. So they've basically given up at this point, and they're just trying to paper over the problems.
One of the things that always fascinates me about the academics, and I'll use the verbal air quotes around their names that do these things, Luke, is that they don't follow it from a scientific perspective that would lead somebody to think that if, okay, this kid that gets free school lunch because his family doesn't make a lot of money is struggling, instead of going in and saying, what can we do to help you do better? What are the issues facing this low-income family that's keeping this kid from achieving? They seem to paper over it as if somehow it's society's failure, not just a failure to perhaps get with the kid earlier. I mentioned this with, of all people, Tim Kaine when he was governor of Virginia, and we talked about the statistics that show the amount of money necessary to get a kid on the right track educationally, show them, what things are needed to, score well, to do well in school societally within a school construct, are minuscule compared to remediating those problems that are allowed to fester and develop by the time they get to high school. So it's fiscally conservative to invest more into early education. It's also, better for the high school kid who has learned through the course of 10 years that, this is how you achieve well in school. But we wait until these kids get to high school and then throw up our hands and say, gee, look, there's an achievement gap.
Right, and that's exactly the phrase that motivates all of this. It's the achievement gap, which basically means Asian kids and white kids and rich kids do better than poor kids and black kids and Hispanic kids. And they view the gap itself as the problem. And so if the Asian kids and the white kids actually go down in performance, that's viewed as a success for the modern K through 12 apparatus, because that lowers the gap. It's all about the gap. It's not that they want to make every kid do better. They also, as you mentioned, it can't be blamed on kids, but it also can't be blamed on administrators because they're the ones doing this stuff. So they blame it on society. Now they say that the phrase achievement gap is itself racist, and they call it educational debt, because it's not up to the kids to achieve in school. It is society which owes them a debt, and that's why they don't score as highly on their test scores. And so this isn't just busing. This is on honors classes and magnet programs are being closed down under the same philosophy. And up in New York City, basically the same consultant, and they offload all these things onto. There's really a playbook that they use to do all this crazy identity politics stuff, because it's very unpopular among Democrats as well as Republicans. And so the school board members kind of lie or are cagey about what they're doing, and they bring in a consultant who then recommends what to do, and they're able to say, well, we were just following, recommendations from a company.
Yeah, right.
And so the company that's doing this in Howard County and in Montgomery County, Maryland, up in New York City, they said, well, we're going to go into these honors classes, and we're going to do away with all the tests by which you gain entrance to the most prestigious schools in New York City, because screening kids on grades or test scores, but not only that, also by discipline, track record, and even truancy is racist. So you have to let a kid in who is truant from his existing school, and who has maybe assaulted people on a regular basis. You have to let him into the most prestigious honors magnet school in town, or else that is racist. So this is basically, it's fueled by equal outcomes, and they kind of work backwards from that. Everything has to be looked at from racial statistics, and if there is not an exactly equal distribution of everything by every race, then it is implied that someone was racist, and there's no obligation to say who or why, but a lot of times they're basically implying that the public school teachers are racist and are sneaking in and are changing the test scores for black kids or whatever. The whole thing is kind of very conspiratorial and falls apart when you look at it closely, but they count on people not being very engaged in local government, and I think that's one of the big takeaways here.
Well, they create a scarlet letter that, is a societal third rail, and you don't want to be called a racist, because once you're called a racist, it becomes real, and then you can't get a job, or your company suffers because you've been labeled a racist because of something you've just asked. And I've watched black men being called racist for, their feelings on whether it's lowering quotas, creating quotas for college admissions, they're like, no, this needs to be something you achieve, not just something you're handed out by some ethnicity, because you're actually hurting high school students by sticking them into a college they may not be prepared for just because you have to check off a box on a form.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically pushing the problem onto someone else. In Seattle, they're teaching, instead of math, they're teaching math ethnic studies, which says that basically math is a tool of the white man that is used to oppress minorities.
I was going to ask you about that.
Instead of empowering them to learn math, which is this great equalizer and which is universal by definition, they are saying, kind of giving them this cop-out and kind of building resentment in kids. But then what happens when you go to get a job? Because if you want to get a high-paying engineering job, they're not going to accept that, the answer to this math problem is that math is racist. But, as long as they can get the statistics that show, suddenly, minorities are passing math at a higher level, that K through 12 administrator gets to check off that box, because people aren't going to realize it's because they changed the curriculum of math. And so it's going to backfire in the end, and we'll probably have to get, engineers, probably import them from India or China or places where they actually still value rigor. But it is a direct assault on merit. There's a school board member in Fairfax County who I saw tweeted yesterday, we have to stop worshiping the false idols of merit. And so this very idea that we should strive to achieve as highly as we can has become at odds with the idea that everyone should perform equally, and since they don't know how to bring certain people up, it's always easier to bring some people down than it is to bring some people up, right? And so it's basically these very radical ideas that are not supported by most Democrats, much less most Republicans, that have completely overtaken this little industry of K through 12 education. And, not only is it basically these kids are being brainwashed from an early age in K through 12 schools, where most of us send our kids. And I think that there is not a lot of attention paid to what's actually going on in K through 12. When you hear people on the right talk about it, they talk about, vouchers and school choice, but that's kind of a cop-out. Like, there is this massive, multi-billion-dollar industry with millions and millions of kids in it that are in these government facilities. It is very important for people to pay attention to what's going on in these schools, because the things that these ideas that are being bandied about and which have really completely taken over without even hardly any opposition, again, are things that are wildly outside of the mainstream. And I think it's basically because there are kids in there that, can't push back, and a lot of adults are just going to work and not really paying attention to what's going on in school. I think it would shock people to learn these philosophies that have overtaken with these educational administrators. And, on the right, they talk about universities, right, and how colleges are very liberal and crazy things go on campus. The campuses don't matter. That is the result of what has already happened to them throughout 13 years of government-funded education.
Luke Rosiak is on with us, investigative reporter with the Daily Caller, probing waste, fraud, dysfunction in the federal government, also a computer program, so he knows a little math. But Luke, you brought up something in the last bit there that I think strikes home. We've got right now, I believe, 7 people running for the GOP nomination to run for Virginia's 7th district, the one that is Abigail Spanberger right now. I think we have 3 people currently running for the GOP nomination to face Mark Warner for the Senate. Yet I would be hard-pressed to be able to hit a conservative candidate for school board with a water balloon if I stood next to them, because there's so few conservatives that seem to be interested in those jobs, those representative offices, but they all want to be a member of Congress or a member of the Senate.
And I think when our country is basically wildly to the left in 10 years or 15 years, people are going to look back and they're going to say that, that was the strategic error of conservatives, is to abandon local government. The way that these radical school initiatives like busing are taking place is because of out-of-state leftist billionaires, mostly George Soros and Mike Bloomberg, are coming in and are seeding the campaigns of people that are running for school board with socialist ideas, and then also funding nonprofits that basically push these ideas and give them a report that says, here's the newest thing in education, you should do this, we'll spell it out for you, and it's busing and all this crazy stuff.
And
on the right, there is a lot of times not even anyone trying, like you said. And the interesting thing here is in Howard County, Maryland, busing was opposed at a rate of 46-1. There was almost no one who wanted it, and the Democrats they elected did this to them anyway. And it probably is going to suppress, it's probably going to destroy maybe $1 billion in property values. People are going to be taken away from their friends, even in their last couple of years of high school. It's just hugely unpopular, life-destroying thing. The Democrats did this. People are realizing identity politics doesn't work because, like you said, it's easy. When you are the one being called racist and you know you're not racist and you know you had your good reasons for opposing this, suddenly the entire social justice thing kind of seems like a scam because you realize, well, maybe when they're calling, New York Times is calling Republicans racist, maybe they're not racist either. Maybe they had their own policy reasons that made sense. And so there is tremendous backlash to these far-left policies that are the result of the Soros wing of the party. And what's going to happen next is going to be really interesting to see is whether people go over to Republicans or whether the Democratic Party shifts a little bit closer to the center or whether the socialist wing just kind of wins, and that's the new future of our country.
Well, when we all, want to vote for socialism because our kids have all been raised that, the equality of outcome is what we're here for, it's a scary place, but that's what we're teaching elementary school kids is that we should all get the same grades. Or I think you mentioned the Seattle story that I wanted to bring up. Also, we're watching SAT scores. We want to either eliminate them or grade them on a curve depending on your economic status. That's stunning to me because how is a college supposed to judge, or are colleges not supposed to judge anymore and just fill in saying, well, we let in the first 100 black kids and the first 20 white kids and the first 30 Oriental kids, and that's our quota. Have a nice day. And it's no longer a place for high academic pursuit. It's just it's becoming what somebody once called 13th and 14th grade rather than college.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, the valedictorian in Detroit went to college and couldn't even do basic math, couldn't even do like 7th grade math. And so we talk about college, we spend all this money for college, but what is the point of college if it is not even 7th grade math? And they've done away with requirements to, again, it all comes back to rigging the stats for people that have vested interest in this education industry. And so they wanted to get more minorities in college, but they were finding that they just didn't have the grades to get in. And so they did away with the tests. You no longer need to do SAT for the University of California. And then they found that, well, once you put these kids in college, they still can't graduate from college. So what's the point of having them there? Well, so then you get rid of the basic courses that are required of all college graduates, like, Algebra 1. And so now we have this basically entire process that is pretty much a ruse designed to get equal outcomes with every single thing in the world seen through the lens of race. A lot of racial resentment being, there's no more meritocracy, and it's not really good for anyone. It's not, and what's interesting here is it's almost, the school boards you talked about that almost no Republicans run for. It's almost all rich white women that are on the left that are pushing these policies. It's not actual minorities. They kind of use them like pawns. And they have the out-of-state interest groups that kind of tell them what to do. The actual minorities are normal people that just want to live in their communities like everyone else and go to school with their friends. And that's especially so with Hispanics that have their own little communities and things like that. No one wants this except a tiny, tiny little cadre of activists. And it's really going to be interesting to see whether, the money of these billionaires like Soros and Bloomberg is enough to override the will of the people, or whether it's that issue you mentioned, that people just aren't that attuned to these down-ballot races like school board stuff.
And we need to, and I think part of that is fed by the centralization of our media, because sure as shooting, Rush Limbaugh isn't going to be talking about this, but we are here in Virginia on these local stations, but we have so few and far between where these discussions are being had. So of course the implication is a congressperson that might show up on Sean Hannity's guest line is much more important than a school board member, and we learn that as well. Luke, I want to bring up something. Before I came down here, I saw probably 13, 14 years ago, there was a research paper done in Philadelphia on a school. It was northwest Philly. And the school board was so desperately trying to fix this school that they took some wild attempts and ran it like a charter school. They kept all the kids in the same school all the way through 12th grade. There was no middle school, high school. It was run by like a boarding school almost. And what they had was the upper class kids working and mentoring the younger kids, second, third, helping with that. And they noticed several things that came out of this research. First was the number of kids that graduated from high school skyrocketed. The number of kids that went on to college skyrocketed. The number of kids from this school that graduated college skyrocketed. But something they didn't expect happened, and that these kids came back to the neighborhood to start businesses. And I find that to be a soft subtext of this as well. This is neighborhood saving. If you can convince kids to achieve and do it in their neighborhoods, they actually come back and save their neighborhoods as well. But if you throw them on a bus and say, listen, kid, the best thing you can do is get out. That's what they're going to do, even if they do manage to overcome the school crippling educational mantra and become successful. They're going to get the hell out of Dodge.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, it does come down to the communities. Communities are the most important thing in our lives. And we spend so much time talking about who's in the White House, who's in Congress. But the fact is, if you are a conservative-leaning person, it doesn't matter if we have a Republican president if every jurisdiction where you live is controlled by Democrats. And what we've seen is that the populous suburbs are the battleground, are the new swing states. And a lot of times they do have more people than a state. Like up where I'm in Fairfax County, 1.2 million people up here. That's twice as big as many states and many major cities.
Yeah.
And this is a place that has a lot of people that think conservative, and that those who are Democrats are not radical socialists. And yet we elected people that are basically socialists. And another example of that is the prosecutor candidates, the Commonwealth attorneys. George Soros came in and spent $850,000 in Loudoun County on the prosecutor's race, similar amounts in Fairfax and Arlington. This is an out-of-state billionaire that is buying elections and having sort of a centrist or center-left jurisdiction full of rich and smart and pretty normal people that is electing just a completely insane person that says he won't prosecute crime because laws are racist. And so this is kind of comes to the future of the country. I mean,
right.
If this can happen here, we're not talking about AOC winning in a 4% turnout race in Brooklyn. We're talking about a pretty major suburb of a very affluent place. When they elect these lunatics, and that's what it is. Some really frightening things are going to happen, and it all happens at the local level, and it's a level we don't think about. But I've become convinced over the last couple of months that this is the most important thing in politics, is to refocus on the local level, and that it is important in its own right, but it also carries over to the national level as well. It kind of bubbles up.
Luke Rosiak, investigative reporter with the Daily Caller. You are absolutely 100% right, and we'll have you back on again to continue focusing the Klieg lamp on that. But I do appreciate it, and you have a wonderful weekend. And if I don't talk to you before then, Merry Christmas.
You too.
Coming up next, Phil Kerpen, president of American Commitment and the Greedy Green Act, next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.